Hello, I'm Diana Thomas.
And I'm Tom Harper,
Welcome to That Wilbur Smith Show.
a podcast about the historical, geographical, natural, and human background to the world of Wilbur Smith.
It was 1996, and I was writing the novel that would become Birds of Prey, my return to the world of the Courtneys. Birds of Prey reached further back in time than any Courtney novel before it, back to the middle of the 17th century, when the English and the Dutch were at war for the rich provinces of southern Africa. The words I was staring at were Francis Courtney speaking to his son Hal. "If I'm being cruel to you," I had written, "it's because I know there is a destiny ahead for you." They were deeply personal because they were inspired by what my father might have said to me. My father, of course, had been more prosaic. "You'll get your ass kicked," he had said, "if you don't pull yourself together." He'd been gone for 11 years, and Birds of Prey was to become my epitaph for him. I'd been chronicling the history of the extraordinary Courtney family since When the Lion Feeds, first with a trilogy focusing on Sean Courtney's life in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and then with a 5-book sequence that began in 1985 with The Burning Shore, continuing through to Golden Fox in 1990. The second series had been about the modern African world, but by 1996 I was keen to go back to the past.
That is Wilbur writing in his autobiography on Leopard Rock about how he came to write this, I guess we'd call it a prequel trilogy about the Courtneys that starts with Birds of Prey, which is the subject of our episode today.
And this is us doing something which I remember mentioning in passing weeks and weeks ago on a previous episode, which is that perhaps we should think about doing the complete and utter history of the Courtney family in the proper historical sequence. And so this is the first of a series of podcasts about what you might call the Courtneys as pirates at sea, sailing up and down the African coast, around Arabia, across to India. And then in later series, we'll be going, as Wilbur did, through the various kind of eras of the Courtney saga. But we're beginning on the high seas with Birds of Prey and a boy at the top of a mast looking out to sea.
Yes, and the boy is Hal Courtney, who is really the hero and the protagonist of this story. And Wilbur talks in that excerpt you read, Diana, about fathers and sons, and that this was the sort of the theme he wanted to address. And that is the engine that drives certainly the first half of the book, is Hal and his father Francis.
Sir Francis
Courtney, I should say.
I mean, it's also a coming of age story. It's a fathers and sons story in which, as it were, the boy becomes a man and, in a sense, leaves his father behind, or not by any choice of his. And what you realize very quickly in the Birds of Prey begins really, really cleverly, because there's actually about 40 pages of the book before what you might call action takes place, like swashing and buckling and fighting and cannons and all that kind of stuff. But what you get is this amazing build-up of all the various characters who are going to pull a selection of the various characters who are going to play out in the book, and the tensions between them, the conflicts between them, the love between them, and the hate between them, the emotions, the emotional landscape of the book is set out really grippingly in the opening of the book.
Yeah, and it's just as well that it is, because this is an absolute epic book. It's nearly 800 pages long. It covers a vast geographical and story area. And the thing that holds it together really is that those core connections between this sort of central cast of characters. And I think, I mean, this book for me is Wilbur at his absolute freewheeling peak. It's a book that's written where you can really see his sort of instinctive approach to storytelling at work. I don't think it's a book that you would ever plan. You certainly don't read the opening and have any clue where it's going to end up.
You don't. You know where it's going to. And it sounds a bizarre thing to say. You know where it's going to start, and I don't think that Wilbur necessarily. I mean, he describes in On Leopard Rock writing this book in his on his private estate in the Seychelles, Cap Colibri, I think it was called.
As we all dream of doing.
Yeah, okay. It just sounds like, oh yeah, that's why you write bestsellers. Okay, so you can have a private estate in the Seychelles. I knew there was a reason I do this for a living.
Yeah.
Except that he actually got it. And he's there, and he's inspired by this idea of fathers and sons, which of course is a motif throughout a lot of his work.
Yeah.
And then there's also a legend in the Seychelles of this amazing kind of cache of priorate gold left by a French pirate, Lavasseur, which has never been found.
Yes.
And so buried or cached hidden treasure is again one of the kind of springs of this book. And someone not a million miles from this podcast in conversation before the show described this book as mad, which it is. It's brilliant.
That was me.
It was you. I actually kept I'm a good journalist. I wouldn't reveal my sources, but since you want to admit it. And I kind of agree with you, because the thing about this book is as you're reading it, it's absolutely gripping. I remember the first time I read it, it was just wonderful. It's proper high octane Wilbur. And then as a sort of professional, you go back and you look at it and think, gosh, this is not a book that anybody the kind of writer who sat down and had all their chapters all worked out in advance and then just kind of painted by numbers going through from kind of 1 to 100. It's absolutely not that book. It's absolutely the book of a man who wrote from instinct, who just could conjure up stories out of the air. So I suppose we should probably now explain both why it's brilliant and it's bonkers. So
yeah, I think it's really feels there's sort of two things I think impressions I get of it. One is of the kind of the classic, almost like Scheherazade with the Arabian Nights, just telling the story and having to sort of continue it and continue it and sort of almost improvising it on the spot. It is like watching a sort of jazz musician doing this sort of virtuoso improvisation. And you sort of keep on waiting for it to all collapse, but actually they're so good they can sustain it.
And as in jazz, it comes back to themes. I mean, a jazz person, Miles Davis would take, I don't know, something like Bye Bye Blackbird, and and having given you the basic theme, would then just go off on a wild improvisation, not brilliant improvisation, and come back to it. And that's kind of what this book does. It keeps coming back to the motifs, the riff.
Yeah, it does, and to the characters and to the places, which we'll talk about. The other thing is, it just reminds me of an overstuffed Christmas stocking. I don't know if you ever come down to one of those on Christmas morning down, where it's absolutely bulging. It's got all the knobbles and bits.
Yes.
Literally, and you're sort of wondering what's in it, because this is a book where it feels as though Wilbur. It's interesting. This was all his most historical book other than the Egypt books to date. So he's going back to a time he'd never really looked at, and it feels like someone who's got so much he wants to write about and he can't bear to leave any of it out, so he's just going to chuck absolutely everything in, several kitchen sinks worth.
I mean, it's amazing. It's got all sorts of different types of history. You have kind of the kind of mercantile history of trade between Europe, Africa, and the Indies. You have the chronicles of war between the English and the Dutch. You have the settling of Africa, starting from Cape Town by Europeans. Before, actually, many of the black African tribes who migrated into southern Africa had got there. At this point, the San, the original inhabitants of the indigenous population. You've got slaving. You've got Zanzibar, you've got the whole Arab world, and then you've got two legendary monarchs, Monomatapa, I think I've got that right, who's the Central African legendary monarch, and Prester John, who's this iconic Christian king who has been a figure of kind of European mythology since the late Middle Ages.
Yeah.
And it's all in one book.
Yeah, and plus one, if not two, of the holiest relics in Christendom just thrown in for good measure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just you're quite right. Just for that, so I'd almost forgotten.
Yeah.
They're like the orange at the bottom,
Yeah.
and a little bit of chocolate as well
Yeah.
at the bottom.
Yeah.
It's the Christmas stuffing. Having said all this, anybody who's listening may have their head whirling now. What on earth are they going on about? So I guess we should begin actually telling the story and revealing the characters.
Well, we've already met Hal, who is the young boy of about 18, I think, when the novel opens. So we're in the 16, I think we're in about 1666.
Even younger, I think he's 16 or 17, I think, but late teens, yeah. He's a teenager.
Yeah, and he's on board his father's ship, which is called...
the Lady Edwina.
The Lady Edwina, of course, named after his mother.
Yes.
And they are on station off the coast of Africa because England is at war with Holland, and they are patrolling for Dutch ships coming back from the Indies laden with treasure and with spices and trade goods. And this is, you talked about the Courtneys as pirates, and this becomes quite a key theme in the book. They are technically privateers because they're sailing under a letter of marque from the king of England, which gives them the right to it's basically subcontracting the business of war.
Yes.
It gives them the right to attack Dutch shipping and profit from it, as long as the state of war persists.
Anyways, so there they are, and what they're waiting for, as well as the first sighting, is the first sniffing, because the first time they detected that the ships are coming is by the smell of spice on the air.
That's right. Yes.
So they sniff out, they literally sniff out their prey.
Yes.
But they're also waiting, they hope, or possibly waiting for assistance from a fellow British privateer, the Earl of Cambrai. Is that how I pronounce it?
Yes, that's how I think of it. And he rejoices in the nickname the Buzzard, and the French pirate that you mentioned, Olivier Levasseur, whose legendary buried treasure was part of what inspired Wilbur in writing this novel. His historical nickname was La Bousse, which our French listeners will know means the buzzard. So Wilbur very much interpolating from history.
That's a very Wilbur-esque thing where you have a character who is named tangentially after a real character.
Yes, but changed in some key ways. So
Massively.
Here he's changed him from a proud Frenchman to a none more Scottish Scotsman. I mean, he's got red hair, he walks around in a kilt, he carries a claymore, and drinks whiskey.
He does.
So there's no mistaking the fact that this man is a Scotsman.
He's not Welsh, that's for damn sure. And he's a rogue. I mean, when we first meet him, he's actually Angus Cochrane, the Earl of Cambrai, aka the Buzzard.
Yeah.
But let's just call him Buzz, or the Buzzard. But anyway, at this point, we know very early he's a bit of a rogue.
Yeah.
He's not trustworthy. He's slippery. He's out for number one. We later discover his family were sheep rustlers before they stumbled upon an earldom by backing the right side in some sort of political Scottish regal fight.
Yeah.
But all we think of at this point is that he's a bit of a rogue.
Although interestingly, part of the way that Wilbur signals that is that he's a slaver.
Yes.
And whereas Sir Francis Courtney will have no truck with that, the Buzzard is a slaver. And I think that's one of Wilbur's sort of not so subtle signals early on, that there are degrees of morality in the privateering business, and the Buzzard is definitely lower down the ladder than Sir Francis.
I mean, basically, almost anybody would be lower down the moral ladder than Sir Francis, because Sir Francis is intensely moral, intensely religious.
Yes.
He and indeed, as the Buzzard does too, but the Buzzard is a bit of a disreputable element. he belongs to this sort of Knights Templar type outfit, referred to as is it the Knights of the Cross of the Holy Grail, or
It's the Knights Nortoniae of St. George and the Holy Grail.
there we go. I know Notonia comes in those also. Anyway, so they are essentially a seaborne version of a sort of chivalric order,
In
and
fact, I think later in the book we discover that in the mythology of the book, when the Templars were all destroyed by the French
yes,
monarchy in the 14th century, the Templars who could sail basically jumped on a ship and escaped and
yes,
founded this order of the Knights Nortoniae. Nortoniae obviously being French for navigator, and this order has then continued down through the centuries
exactly,
and to the present.
and Hal is being initiated by his father into two things: first, seafaring, and second, the order. So when we meet Hal, he's endlessly being schooled toughly. There's a definite tough love element,
Yeah,
so that he will know how to navigate, know how to run a ship, and also know the rituals and the code and the catechism and all that sort of Freemasonry-ish stuff that goes with being in some sort of secret
yeah,
order.
yeah,
And being a young lad of in his teens, and at this point we should also note that he's described as being still, and he can't be that too far into his teens because he's still described as being essentially beardless and still has that look where there's an almost prettiness about him. He's just
yeah,
this very beautiful young adolescent, but he's not by any means a man, although he's learning it,
yeah,
um, as we discover, because he's tested as much as his father is testing him in what you might call the mental aspects of his what he's essentially going to inherit. He's also being tested physically by his father's loyal lieutenant Aberley.
yes. And this is the first appearance of Aberley, who I think is one of the great fan favorite characters who recurs in future books. And yes, he is this super cool warrior, an African who was taken from his homeland as a child, enslaved, then I guess freed by Sir Francis, and has become Sir Francis's consigliere, right hand
Yes,
man, um, an absolute warrior of the First Order. And yes, he appears very early on in Birds of Prey. Um, Basically appears out of nowhere and
yes,
jumps on Hal with a giant sword, and or you think what on earth is happening? Someone trying to kill him, and
yes.
then you realise that this is actually a practice fight. But
It's,
it's a pretty hard fought practice fight.
as you describe that, I'm thinking of the Pink Panther and
Yeah, yes,
and Kato coming out of
yes,
a
yeah,
cupboard.
yeah. There is something in that, isn't there? Yeah,
But the key thing about Aberley, and this will become important in the story, is that his face is covered with scars, with as well sort of ceremonial scars,
yeah. So ritual scarring. Yeah,
ritual scarring. Exactly, his face is covered with that, and in this, so after Hal has been jumped on, they have a fight, and the crew gather round, and what happens is that Hal, for the very first time, I think, or get the impression it's the first time, bests Aberley, and I think actually cuts him, doesn't he? Um,
yes, he does.
and
Yeah,
and is then told to urinate over the cut because that will disinfect it.
yes,
And we learn that along the way in the fight, Aberley is actually secretly very pleased about this because it shows that Hal is sort of getting towards. In a way, it's a sort of initiation you might almost get in a warrior tribe. I mean, you prove your manhood by acts of valor and physical courage and physical ability. Um,
also kind of going beyond. I think it's almost like sort of blood mist, this red mist comes over Hal,
yes,
and that's when he suddenly starts fighting. And it's this
yes,
idea that you can't live in this sort of slightly safe childhood
yes,
world where
exactly.
it's all a game and you don't really have to
No,
give it your all. You absolutely have to commit and really go beyond yourself. in order to become a man. And I think that's, again, a very strong idea in Wilbur's writing.
And both Aberley and Sir Francis are, as it were, risking Hal hating them in order to get Hal toughened enough to be able to withstand the life that he is bound to encounter being in the situation he is. So there they are. Meanwhile, and they're on the Lady Edwina, which is principally a fighting vessel, a fighting frigate.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, a great, big, vast Dutch ship. It's called the Steadfastness, isn't it?
Standvastigheid.
Very good.
Which is, as our listeners will know, is Dutch for resolution.
Resolution, I suppose. I knew it was something like that. Anyway, aboard this ship are two characters, three actually, who are going to become four characters. We're going to I keep thinking it's like Monty Python there.
Amongst the characters on this ship are such diverse characters as.
Okay, I was literally saying the words Monty Python when you interrupted me. Listeners, you should know that Tom and I have spent the morning basically gag fighting, which is that we think of the same joke at the same time and then try and get it out ahead of the other one. So I apologise if this is spilled into the podcast. Anyway, among the characters on the Resolution are the Dutch governor, soon to become of the Cape Province, who is sailing west from the Indies with a
whose name is Petrus van der Velde.
Van der Velde, exactly.
Yep.
Who is sailing from the Indies with his ship filled with, spice and hardwood and gold and silver and just lots of thoroughly treasury things. And a military man,
Cornelius Schroeder,
who is a proud, arrogant, fighting man, just the sort of chap who's going to come up against the Courtneys, you think, and a sort of nursey, handmaideny, nannyish old servant called Zelda, who is sort of spying on the woman who is her mistress on behalf of Van der Velde, and the woman who is the absolute sun around whom all these other characters revolve is Katinka. Katinka is Van der Velde's very beautiful wife.
Yes, very beautiful, very young.
Very young. She's been sort of married off to Van der Velde as a kind of political move because her father is a very big, powerful figure in Dutch political life.
In the Dutch East India Company.
Indeed. But the thing about Katinka is, let's be frank about this, she is bad to the bone. This is first indicated by the fact that she is ruthlessly sexual, by which I mean to say it's not just that she is highly sexed, it's that she is extremely manipulative and devious and cunning and even sadistic as things play out in the ways in which she will use her sexuality to give herself power and to harm other people. And she's very, very, very gorgeous and knows it.
So and has this, as you were sort of saying, it's not that she's intensely sexual, although she is, and it's not also that she's intensely brutal and cruel, although she is. It's the fact that those two things are absolutely bound up in her, so that she does derive this sexual pleasure from cruelty and blood and seeing people hurt.
Yes, she's a sort of psychopathic sadist, basically, wrapped up in a sort of fabulous Hollywood bombshell exterior. And I think it's important because
the other thing, of course, that we find problematic these days is that later it turns out she's actually bisexual.
Yeah, but that's true. But the point is not that she's a highly bisexual woman. It's the delight she takes in hurting other people and in torturing them and in teasing them and in provoking them. And that's what makes her one of the Okay. One, if not two, if not three, if not four, if not among the many things that make this book fascinating is the multiplicity of bad guys that Francis and Hal have to come up against. Anyways, so the two ships draw near, and the Dutch are unaware they're coming up against a ship
Yeah.
that is about to attack them.
I think it's fair to say that one of the reasons they're unaware is that Sir Francis Courtney, this terribly honourable knight who reads divine service to his sailors every day, is approaching flying the Dutch flag. I don't know about you, but this struck me as a bit underhanded.
Well, all's fair in love and war, but yes, you're right. It's not cricket, that's for sure.
No, it's not cricket.
And she, Katinka, is actually, she goes out onto the balcony of her cabin, I think I'm right in saying,
Yeah,
to have a look at the sailors who are approaching and to let them have a good look at her, because she just simply cannot resist. It's a kind of addictive thing with her.
Yeah, she's sort of flashing her cleavage at them, I think. Is that right?
Yes, she is,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so the exercise of her sexual power is a compulsion, in the same way that, as it were, the exercise of his honor is a compulsion for Schroeder, or that's where the endless hunt for treasure is a compulsion for the buzzard, or this kind of almost crusaderish kind of Christian ethic that Sir Francis has.
Yeah.
Anyway, by about 40 pages into the book, these two ships are now floating close together,
Yeah.
sailing slowly close together, and then Sir Francis lowers the Dutch flag and pulls up his real flag, which is the croix pattée, which I think is a cross with a bar across it. Is that right? Or it's like a cross de Lorraine or something like that. Anyway, it's a cross,
yeah.
which is the symbol of the Notonnier Knights. And does he also put up the English?
Yes, I'm pretty sure he also puts up the cross of St George. Yeah.
And all of a sudden, he has placed his ship alongside the Resolution, and kabang! The attack begins.
Yeah, for the first, but definitely not the last time in the book, all these characters are thrown violently together. And we're not going to go into all the ins and outs, but Sir Francis leads of this battle. But Sir Francis leads his crew aboard the Dutch ship, and the battle is sort of going quite well for them. But then a cowardly seaman named Sam Bowles retreats. I guess the battle's turned against him a bit. He retreats back to the Lady Edwina, cuts the cables that are holding her onto the Dutch ship, and sails her away with a few of his shipmates, basically cowardly leaving the fight and leaving Sir Francis to his fate. And this is again such a classic Wilbur touch, in that Sam Bowles comes in and he's just some random seaman. And the first time he's introduced, it's almost as if Wilbur just needed to give a name to a character who's doing this thing.
I don't think it's almost as if. I think that Sam Bowles, he was obviously, in a writer's mind, written to serve a particular plot function, which is to separate one boat from another, because that actually, the purpose of that is to enable Hal to carry out his first act of manly valor and leadership.
Yeah.
But something about Sam Bowles must have resonated with or stuck in Wilbur's mind, because this snivelling character, this awful ratty little man, then literally takes on a life of his own, and that it always seems like a cliche when a writer says, "Oh, a character started to write themselves," but it's true. It's absolutely true. That is what happens.
Yeah.
You get a character, and they won't go away. You keep needing them, or you keep kind of wanting to scratch that itch and go back to them.
Yeah.
But there's just something about them. They're just tremendously useful or tremendously interesting or what have you. So Sam Bowles, he's only ever going to be like a supporting cast. He's the kind of, if you were to make a mega movie of this, Sam Bowles is the kind of juicy little part that a really good character actor, like a younger Tim Roth or someone like that, could do and suddenly
Yeah.
find themselves winning the best supporting actor thing.
Yeah,
It's that
yes.
kind of a
Tim
part.
Roth would be great.
But
Yeah,
anyways,
yeah. And in fact, as a character who seems to sort of come on almost accidentally, he actually, outlives
yeah,
a lot of the more kind of headline
he
cast, and
really
actually
does.
has arguably more of an impact on some of the core story moments.
And also his kind of he goes from being just a cowardly chancer, basically.
Yeah,
He does become proper bad
yeah.
as things go on.
Luckily, Hal is able to pretty much single-handedly get back aboard the Lady Edwina, face down Sam Bowles, bring the ship back to the Dutch ship just in time to rescue his father and complete the conquest of the Dutch ship for England.
Yes, indeed. So now I'm trying to remember the geography of the ships and who is on what boat when. But the kind of key plot thing that next, or the key character development thing that happens in Hal's life is that he ends up in the next door cabin to Katinka.
Yes. So just to clarify the logistics of the boats, because the Standvastigheid, the resolution, is a much superior ship. And this is again, I love this, the sort of the pragmatism of this, because often in sort of nautical fiction, the ship is really romanticized. And here,
Yes.
even though the ship is named after his late wife, the Lady Edwina, Sir Francis has no compulsion. He's like, oh, well, that's a rubbish ship. The new ship's much better. I mean, so he basically moves his entire crew minus sort of small skeleton crew onto the newly renamed Resolution, sends off the Lady Edwina with I think to head for home, and decides that Standvastigheid is the ship
No,
for
no,
him.
he's taken Van der Velde and Katinka captive, and isn't the Edwina sent off to take the message back to Holland that he will release?
Yes, that's right. That's right. He said so. Schroeder is sent to Holland to take the message about the capture and to demand the ransom, and Van der Velde and Katinka stay with Sir Francis until he can ransom them.
And then they sail off towards Sir Francis, sort of his base,
His pirate lair, if
his
you will.
parent, indeed, an Elephant Lagoon, it's called.
Elephant,
Um,
yeah. Which is never, the location's never really specified, but it's got to be, I figure, somewhere between Cape Town and Durban
yes,
on the sort of southeast corner of South Africa.
although there is at this point no such thing as Durban, but yes, in contemporary terms, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And there's a bay, and within the bay there's a lagoon. It's sort of two levels of, and so they go to the lagoon because I think also the Resolution has been damaged in the storm, hasn't it? It's been
And
hit.
yeah, first of all, it was damaged in a storm, then obviously it's been damaged in the
Yeah.
big fight.
So they go to the bay, and they unload the cargo.
Yeah.
The best bits of which are taken off to this secret hideaway which Sir Francis
Yes.
has, sort of
Yes,
in
and
a
only Sir Francis and Hal know where it is. Even Aberley and some of their other kind of core crewmates aren't let
exactly.
in on the secret of where they're hiding the treasure.
But meanwhile, Hal has for the first time in his life, really, because you sort of get the impression he's been at sea most of his since he was a child,
Hmm.
and therefore in kind of male company. And here is Katinka, who is kind of intrigued by him because he's very beautiful, but then he's also beginning to develop a proper man's body in every respect.
Yeah.
Um, and she's kind of, and also she loves the idea that he is so completely naive about sex, and therefore is vulnerable to her manipulations. And then when they come ashore, I think they are beginning to have actual sexual relations. And of course, how young men, people greatly underestimate how romantic young men can be and how innocent they can be compared with women of their own age, and certainly women a few years older.
Yeah, although I think what Wilbur captures here is that where kind of lust and romance sort of get confused in the adolescent
Totally.
male mind, and
Totally,
what
yeah.
these incredibly strong feelings that you're having and that Hal has for her, he interprets as this tremendous pure love. And there's a moment where he imagines himself, he wants to be like Sir Lancelot, when in fact, you, the older and wiser reader, know that actually there is some of that going on. I'll be fair to Hal, but there is an awful lot of hormones driving that.
Oh yeah, absolutely on both sides,
Yeah,
but absolutely. But the difference is that one of the two protagonists knows exactly what they're doing, and
yeah,
the other one hasn't got an earthly, not
no,
the faintest clue.
no,
So so there they all are, hiding treasure, repairing the boat. When who should turn up at Elephant Lagoon? Uh-oh, it's the buzzard. And in he sails, and he notices that Sir Francis has captured this mighty prize, and he sort of feels he should have a piece of it
yeah.
because
It's been unfortunate timing from the buzzard's point of view,
very
because he decided to leave and head for home
exactly.
hours before the Lady Edwina sighted the Dutch ship. And if they'd attacked it together, then obviously they would have shared all the booty.
But as it is, Sir Francis sees no reason why he should share it. Of course, the buzzard then says, "Yeah, but I was there for most of it. Yeah, but you weren't there for the actual bit of it. You were hanging around, true, but you didn't actually get it. Sorry, old boy." And the buzzard fails to see
Yeah.
the fairness of this conclusion and can't quite shake it out of his head that he should have a share of the treasure, and basically that share should amount to, 100%. But anyway, so then there follows. Okay, one of the things that is fascinating about this book is that, and this we mentioned earlier, the idea of as it were, the motif that is picked up, variations are played on it. The tune carries on, and then later that original motif comes back. And one of the motifs that comes back three times, I think, is the idea of a fight, a battle at land and sea, in the waters and on the shores at Elephant Lagoon. Elephant Lagoon becomes, it's like the first, second, third, fourth, fifth battles of Ypres. This piece of sand and palm and water, because everybody thinks that there's treasure actually right there under the actual shore of the bay, so they keep coming back there to try and get that treasure. So there then follows the first battle of Elephant Lagoon.
Although just before that, there's one key thing that happens before Sir Francis and the buzzard fall out, is that they induct Hal as a knight notonnier.
Indeed, they do.
And this is a great sort of rite of passage for him. And as part of that, he is presented with this wonderful heirloom of the Neptune sword,
Yes.
which is this incredible, beautiful, beautiful sword with a giant sapphire in the pommel, which was presented to one of the Courtney ancestors by Sir Francis Drake.
I think it's Sir Francis's grandfather was a captain with Drake when they attacked Cadiz, the singeing of the King of Spain's beard. And the sword was captured, I guess, from either a Spanish admiral or a Spanish ship in that engagement, and then presented to the patriarch, as it were, of the Courtney clan.
Yeah.
So Hal is now a member of the Knights.
And the Neptune sword will recur in future books, and again as a sort of symbolic talisman of the Courtneys.
Yeah. And the other key thing is that Hal is sneaking into Katinka's tent at night,
Yeah.
and blissfully unaware that the bellowing sounds of his exertions and her screams mean that it's not entirely a secret activity.
Yes, which again I think is the inexperience of youth. You don't realise how far sound carries.
Anyway, the other thing is that Hal in this period is taken to Sir Francis's treasure, which is in a cave up a 100-foot drop. You have to walk along a path with a sheer drop on one side to get to this cave, which is sealed with rocks, and inside it are the proceeds from all his many
Yeah.
escapades.
Yeah. And only Hal and Francis know the location.
Thoroughly honourable escapades, not at all like piracy. I mean, no, not in the slightest bit. Look, I've got this piece of paper from the king that says, I am not a pirate. That'll do.
Yes. And there is, again, I think Wilbur's, having known Wilbur and known what he was, his view of the world, he is, I think, enjoying juxtaposing the very chivalric induction of Hal into this ancient order of knights, with them stashing the pirate treasure. It's just the juxtaposition of these very noble sentiments expressed in Latin and all derived from Christianity and all the rest of it, with all these very, very ignoble things going on.
And also a philosophy in writing terms which absolutely does not think that less is more. No, more is more.
No. And this book, of all his books, I think this is a more is more book.
However, we must get to the action. Action.
Yes, although sorry, there's one key point, which is that along with the buzzard has picked up a passenger en route, who is Sam Bowles, the sailor last seen cowardly sailing away from the battle, who was going to be hanged but managed to jump overboard. Basically feeds his shipmates to sharks in order that he survives, clinging to a barrel until the buzzard picks him up. So he's now thrown in his lot with the buzzard.
Hasn't he just?
And maybe this is a sign that the buzzard doesn't have Sir Francis's best interests at heart, because one evening, suddenly shots ring out and the buzzard is launching an attack. He's got his ship in the lagoon, and whereas the Resolution's cannons have all been offloaded onto the land, and so so the buzzard lets rip with his cannons, using his ship as sort of a floating gun platform.
Yes, as I recall, he's got it anchored in such a way and tied in such a way that he can, as it were, sort of swing the boat around on its anchor to as it were, play the guns on whatever part of the beach and he wants to.
Yes.
But Hal and Aberley, I think they get a little bit of warning, don't they?
Well, they do, because they are canny, and as they are out duck hunting, they spot the buzzard tying the springs in his anchor cables that will allow him to maneuver the gun. So they work out that he's up to no good. So Hal's ingenious solution is to create some little fire rafts, burning rafts. Yeah.
That's exactly what Drake had done when he singed the King of Spain's beard.
Yeah, exactly. Which he hides on the other side of the lagoon. And so when the buzzard attacks, Hal and Aberley swim over with these rafts of burning wood and tar and stuff, and push them into the buzzard's ship, which duly catches fire.
At which point, the buzzard, since fire is the thing which people are most terrified of at sea, and of course, if you've got a ship loaded up with gunpowder, it can go bang in the most serious way if the fire and the gunpowder mix. The buzzard has no alternative but to save himself by sailing out, getting the pumps working as fast as he can. He sails away to sea.
And interestingly, we then follow the buzzard down to Cape Town, where this is a very, very funny scene. This is Wilbur again having tremendous fun, because there's a ship in Cape Town, and the buzzard decides he's going to cut it out, sneak aboard in the middle of the night and steal it, which he does highly successfully. And then he makes two surprising discoveries. One is that the man on board is none other than Colonel Schroeder, who is on his way back to Holland with a ransom demand. And the second piece of news is that the war between England and Holland is over. Peace has broken out.
And indeed was over at the time at which Sir Francis attacked the Resolution. This is an incredibly the plot of the entire book really sort of hangs upon this thing that Sir Francis has in fact, though he does not know it at the time, been a pirate because his license to be a privateer for the king has effectively run out now that peace has been declared and England and Holland are all lovey-dovey again.
It's like the old line, treachery is only a matter of dates. In this case, piracy is a matter of dates, because if you're doing it as a privateer while war's declared, then you're fine. But if it's peacetime, then you're just a pirate.
You're even fine to do it if, as it were, you can prove that you did not know that the war was over and that you were a legitimate privateer to begin with, and B, had no knowledge. Because, of course, this is the 17th century, so news travels very, very slowly, particularly if you're at sea. So it's perfectly reasonable that somebody would legitimately not know what the situation was, but they have to be able to prove that they, as it were acting as they genuinely believed they were acting within the terms of the charter that they had been granted by their sovereign. That's the kind of what the rule book says. This will become very important.
The other thing, there's a little Easter egg here for Wilbur fans, because the Dutch ship that he has tried to cut out is called the Sonnevogel, which is Dutch for sunbird. So another appearance of Wilbur's favourite bird. And obviously a book we've discussed previously on this podcast.
And there are honeybees too at some point, also from the sunbird. Anyway, so the buzzard and Schroeder,
yes,
realize that they share a common enemy, and my enemy's enemy is my friend. And they also realize that they know where they're pretty sure they know. Well, actually, they do know where he is. They know exactly where he is.
Yeah.
And they also know what he's got there. They don't know exactly where he's got it. But Schroeder can gain tremendous prestige and restore his reputation.
Yes.
By going to the governor of the Cape and saying, look, the pirate who took our ship, we know where he is. He's got Van der Velde and Katinka with him. He's also got the ship with him, of course, and he's got the treasure with him. And so a sort of two-pronged assault is then mounted. We're kind of zipping through the pages here, but effectively as well. A two-pronged assault is mounted.
But actually, I mean, we're not actually zipping through that many pages, because actually Wilbur is zipping through the story.
Very good point.
This is structurally one of the interesting things about this novel, and that you already remarked upon, that we have a battle, effectively the same battle fought 3 times in the same place with different outcomes. But he's not putting a lot of space in between the first Battle of Elephant Lagoon and the second Battle of Elephant Lagoon. It's basically only as much time as it takes to get everyone back there.
And as much time as it takes, and also for you to get a sense of the African interior as seen through the eyes of people who've never been there before. Because what happens is, it's a classic kind of land and sea assault. It's very contemporary in that respect.
Yeah.
So that
amphibious operation.
Yes, the buzzard is going to sail back up the coast and attack Elephant Bay from the sea, and Schroeder is going to lead his troops, which are kind of native troops and Dutch troops from the garrison at Cape of Good Hope in Cape Town. He's going to lead them sort of diagonally northeast across what is now South Africa, I suppose.
I think that's not accurate. I think he gets dropped off just up the coast from Elephant Lagoon. It's later that Hal goes across country.
I'm messing up my battles, aren't I? You're quite right.
Yeah, you're confusing the second and third battle.
Easily done. Rookie error, but easily done. You're quite right.
Yeah.
But they do. There is still some interaction with nature. But you're right. They get dropped off.
They go about 3 days. They got like a 3-day hike to get from the drop-off point back to the Elephant Lagoon.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway. Quite right. So the buzzard is coming in from the sea. Schroeder is coming in from land to take, as it were, the Courtneys in the rear. So they're going to be attacked, a two-pronged assault. And in order not to have to repeat the description of a battle, can we give what the result is of the second leg of this tie?
Well, before we give the result, again, there's one thing that's happened while the Dutch have been regathering their forces and making kind of common cause with the buzzard, which is that, as well as all the other elements of this novel, there's also a sort of astrological dimension, because Sir
Ah,
Francis
yes,
can
yes,
cast
yes.
horoscopes and read the stars, and he has cast his own horoscope, and he's not massively enthused by what he sees in his own future.
At what point does the blood red comet cross his birth star?
Yes, that's now. I'm pretty sure that's now.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is, I mean, I'm no astrologer, but I think a blood red comet crossing your birth star is generally taken to be a bad thing. Um, so, and this is the crucial bit, he's foreseeing that he is not necessarily long for this earth. He makes Hal swear the solemnest oath he possibly can that he will never, ever, ever, ever divulge the location of the treasure,
No matter.
no matter what. Yeah, and this is a really interesting point of the novel for me, because this becomes a real test for Hal, and ultimately it will have catastrophic consequences.
Exactly.
And to a modern reader, you're thinking, oh, for heaven's sake, just give him the treasure and save what's really important to you. But again, the way the Courtneys, and certainly the way Francis thinks, is the treasure is the most important thing. And even to save his own life, he would not have it given up.
But it sort of is, in the sense that it's his legacy. I mean,
Yeah.
the treasure is what will enable his family to prosper. In his mind, it's what he's a man who has striven all his life to sort of fund a dynasty, as it
Mm.
were, and this is the means by which his heirs, Hal in particular, can then acquire status and prosper. And my son, I'm not going to let my son, even if he's trying to help me, betray the thing which I think is important. Because it's kind of, he's thinking he's being altruistic, but in a sort of very selfish way.
Yeah.
Because I think Hal makes it quite clear that he'd rather have his father than the treasure.
Yes, he does. And again, I think you made the point earlier that all the characters surrounding Hal have their flaws, and it's Hal's maturing is learning to recognize those. And I think this is his father's flaw, that as noble and religious and virtuous and honorable as he is, he can't see past the treasure, and ultimately that's his undoing.
So where we have the setup here then is that we have what are in fact overwhelming forces converging on the bay, and a father who has entrusted his son with a secret and told him, do not give this away. And the reason this becomes important is that the second battle at Elephant Lagoon is one that the Courtneys lose.
Yeah. They are sort of outnumbered, outgunned, surrounded by the attack from the rear that Schroeder's leading, and they are all captured. And this is clearly the low. Well, it's the start of the low point of the novel for the Courtneys, because the low point does get lower.
Yeah, yeah.
They're taken back to Cape Town in chains, and they are thrown in the prison of the Cape Castle.
Worse than chains, they're taken back to Cape Town in the slave holds of
That's right,
the
of the Buzzard's
Gull
ship.
of Moray, of the
Yeah.
Buzzard's ship. So they actually experience that journey as slaves.
Yeah.
And they're all lying there together. And at one point, Hal, one of the sailors, Daniel, I think it is, who's one of the most loyal members of the crew, the boatswain of the ship, has been wounded, and Hal is chained next to him, and has to remove a musket ball from Daniel's back in order that he can survive, which he successfully does. Which is kind of important because it's another kind of rite of passage for Hal, and also it means that Daniel's alive, which also becomes important later. And so they arrive there as slaves. They're chained, they're filthy. They're then separated from the black crew members, including Aboli.
Yes, this is where they exercise their white privilege, because of course you can't actually enslave a white person in the Cape Colony.
That's true. You can treat them as, but it's a very fine difference. And weirdly, what happens is that Francis, Hal, and the white crew members of the Courtney crew are placed in a stinking jail. The black survivors, four of them, are actually initially treated better. They're fed better and kept in better, but only in order that they might fetch a better price on the block.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And the key thing that happens in terms of the slaves is that three of them end up being bought by the buzzard. After one of them, which is Aboli, has been bought by Katinka for a knockdown price because nobody dares argue with her because her husband is about to become the new governor. And she just basically likes the idea. She basically fancies Aboli and likes the idea of being able to humiliate him and
Yes.
enslave him and demean him. So they're there. The white slavers, including Sir Francis, the white crew members, including Sir Francis, are in a cell in the bowels of the castle at Cape Town. Over to you.
Yes. There are two. In fact, there are three new characters.
Some of the new characters we meet here.
Amongst the new characters are. So there.
No one expects the new character.
There's a fellow prisoner called Althuda, who has tried to lead a rebellion against a breakout. He was a slave who tried to lead a breakout against the Dutch and was recaptured. There is his sister Sukina, who is a slave also owned by Katinka, and this becomes significant. And then there is Stardiger John, Slow John, who is the town executioner.
It's also a thing that the Altuda and Sukina, they are, I suppose, Indonesian, we would now say, by racially, that they were enslaved in the Indies.
Yeah, the Dutch East Indies, yeah.
Which I think would be sort of Indonesia in that part of the world, Malaysia, I don't know.
Yeah.
And the key point is that they are mixed race. Their mother was a princess.
That's right, an Indonesian princess.
And their father is English.
That's right, yes.
So they speak English. And this, but it also gives them a side, in the kind of racial context of the book, it's an interesting twist that they are half English.
Yeah.
And to the cut to the chase here, two things happen with the slavers, the crew members. I'm so sorry. Sir Francis, everybody knows that Sir Francis knows where the treasure is hidden. The buzzard has basically taken Sir Francis's letters of marque, or whatever it's called, the document which means that he is a privateer and on the orders of the king, essentially denying Sir Francis the ability to prove in court that he was anything other than a pirate.
Well, he's burned them, hasn't he? He takes the letter of marque and he burns it in front of Sir Francis.
That's right.
As if it never existed.
Exactly. So now, Sir Francis taking the resolution is an act of piracy for which he's going to be tried on pain of death. The problem from the point of view of Van der Velde and the buzzard and Schroeder is that they don't want Sir Francis to die until he's told them where the treasure is. So Hal and most of the crew have been made essentially slave labourers. They're working every day, clad in almost nothing, to build the walls of the castle in Cape Town. Incredibly dangerous conditions, brutal. They're whipped. They're nothing more than animals, really, in the eyes of the Dutch. They have no status.
And they're being worked to death, basically.
And they're being worked to death. Exactly. Aboli has become the groom and coachman for Katinka, who's dressed him up in this fancy uniform. And she thinks she's sort of tamed him, although he is actually now establishing communications both from him to Hal and from Sukina to Althuda. So they're beginning to develop a connection and a sort of suggestion that they will work together to escape one day, who knows how. And finally, Sir Francis, bereft of the proof that he was acting in his lights honourably and not as a pirate, is on trial for piracy. And there's no doubt about what the verdict is going to be. The question is this, and he's put to Sir Francis very, very bluntly. He has a choice. He can give up the treasure, the location of the treasure, and have a swift death, a swift and relatively painless death. Execution, bang, it's gone. Or he can try to keep the location secret, but it will be an entirely futile endeavour because Slow John, the wicked, lifeless almost, cold, unfeeling, brutal, physically very powerful colony torturer and executioner, will take the secret out of him, bone by bone, limb by limb, cut by cut, burn by burn, until he speaks.
Will he be able to resist the horrific tortures of Slow John? Sadly, that's all we've got time for this week. You might think that having had at least three enormous set-piece battles, more villains than you can shake a stick at, buried treasure, our heroes in jeopardy, we're somehow coming to the denouement of this novel. But you would be completely wrong.
No.
We've not even really got going on the actual main business of the novel yet.
We have barely dipped our spoon into the gooey, sticky, sweet, scrummy trifle that is Birds of Prey.
So do join us next time when we look at the stunning second half of Birds of Prey. But until then, it's goodbye from me, Tom Harper.
And it's goodbye from me, Diana Thomas.
That Wilbur Smith Show is produced by Christopher Wynne. Music by Dewey DeLay. Executive producer Niso Smith.